Hello, all, and welcome back to another episode of Movies and Us, a weekly gathering place filled with conversations about movies, stories, and connection. My name is Jennifer Hahn.
And I'm Sarah Callan.
And today we are continuing Scorsese September with the film The Departed. Sarah, do you want to kick us off with an IMDb summary for The Departed?
Sure. An undercover cop and a mole in the police attempt to identify each other while infiltrating an Irish gang in South Boston.
This is a recipe for great things. Everything in there. Everything in that IMDb summary. Like, yes, 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 yes. I'm here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it has everything we could want.
Yes. Let's start off with our one-sentence summaries for The Departed. Sarah, what was yours?
Mine is a rat hunt and a mole hunt collide in Boston.
Yes. Both a rat and a mole hunt. We're doing all the hunting.
We got them both. We're hunting lots of little critters.
Yes. Yes. Lots of little critters. Four-legged little furry fur balls. There's a lot of them.
Mm-hmm.
My one-sentence summary is, the game is more fun with 2 cats and 2 mice, but only 2 men playing.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. All right. Let's start off with our initial thoughts of The Departed. We will not include any spoilers in this first section, and then I think we'll probably quickly get to a spoiler alert and then have full reign to talk about the rest of the film. So, Sarah, this is your second time, maybe third, but probably second time watching The Departed, right?
Yeah, this is my second time watching it. I watched it for the first time a couple of years ago, so it wasn't like a super long time ago, but I am pleased to report that it still holds up.
Yes.
I think I enjoyed it the second time more than I did the first time.
Really?
Yeah.
Why is that?
I was able to pick up on some things that I don't think I focused on as much the first time.
Okay.
I also don't remember it being as funny as it is.
Right?
So I just had a really good time watching this. And like your one sentence summary says, you know, it's a cat and mouse game, but everybody is both a cat and a mouse. And it's just fascinating the way that the film is structured. And you see these 2 characters running on these 2 parallel tracks, and how opposite they are from each other and how similar they are. And then even people in their orbit, you know, they have, you know, these kind of pseudo father figures in their, they have these kind of like leadership enforcer figures in their orbit. So it's just fascinating the way they were able to create these 2 parallel worlds that are so different but are so the same. And then you see how those 2 interact with each other, and they're so combustible. And it's just,
it's such a great way to say it.
Thrilling to watch.
They're so combustible, and indeed they are.
Yeah, it's very explosive.
Yeah, it's so good. I'm intrigued to hear what those things that you might have noticed more of the second time around are, if you're able to share them. Maybe you need to wait till spoiler alert has been made, but is there anything that can be shared now?
I think one of the things that really stood out to me this time that I wasn't super paying attention to the first time is just how like women are seen and treated in this world. And it's the same on both sides. So there are 2 conversations that happen kind of in the middle of the film, on the cop side and on the gangster side. And they both basically get to this point of, you as a male can only be trusted if you are in a relationship with a woman. And it was just really fascinating because that then colors a relationship that Colin has. And you see it maybe in a different light than you would have. But it was that constant reinforcement of, these are 2 truly parallel lines. Even though they're on different sides of the law, they operate by a lot of the same rules, and they have a lot of the same philosophies as guiding principles, even though they are enemies. And so I
Mm,
think that that
mm,
just makes for such an interesting film because these two groups are the same, really. Uh, one is just the law and one is doing things illegally. So I think that that just makes for a really interesting premise and a really interesting setup. And I was a lot more focused on maybe the
same.
organizations and the things happening around the main characters this time, whereas the first time I'm obviously more focused on the characters.
Mm,
uh I don't know, and it still holds up. It's still interesting no matter what you're
yes.
focusing on in this movie.
But I think the fact that this movie has continued to hold up and you are seeing new things is a testament to how much depth and density there is in this movie to continue to unearth new things. You know, that's a sign of a great film. And any piece of art is when you continue to go deeper, there's actually more that it reveals itself to you, more layers to unpack, which is so fun. I love it.
Hmm.
Sarah, I was filled with such glee for this 2 hour and a half experience, which I don't usually say about a lot of films, but I had the best time watching this movie. And I think it's one of those rare films where every aspect of the filmmaking is working together and they're all strong in every aspect: the score, the script, the dialogue, the character creation, the cinematography. It is all so strong. They're operating on all cylinders. And for a film to be so well executed and so well crafted in all aspects and to have them all cohesively come together in this way is just, it's rare. It's rare to find, and it's thrilling when we discover something like that. Um, I think that this film is wildly entertaining. It's very funny, and also just the premise itself is really engaging. I mean, it's inherently exciting and thrilling to watch two organizations realize there's a mole within each other and have to then take their moles and investigate and find essentially themselves. Like that in and of itself, I think sets up for a great and entertaining film. But I loved how much this truly is a process movie in a lot of ways. There's that in and of itself was incredibly thrilling. Um, Items that are left behind, coded language, special objects that they need to use to communicate with each other, like moments where there's setups and sting operations and how will they maneuver themselves out of those situations, I think just makes for a really good time. And then uh, beyond that top entertaining layer, I think that there's a lot to these themes and these characters that is really fascinating, especially our two main characters that are clearly fools from each other. But in a lot of ways, they are being used by the systems that they are a part of. And there's a lot around their identities and their histories and their backgrounds that also fuel their fates as well and fuel their usefulness to the organizations that they're a part of. So I think that in and of itself is also, there's just so much thematically to unpack. So this checks off like every box for me, man. I'm not gonna lie. Like I am enthralled with this movie.
I'm so pleased. Yes,
It's
Scorsese
so
has done it again.
He really has. He really has. And it's fascinating to me also to just know that this is the film that they gave him the Oscar for, you know? Um, in a lot of ways, like he's created up until this movie so many gems and treasures. But I think we can talk about, the fact that this is the one that the Academy was like, we are going to personally reward you for this. It's also just fascinating to think about from a like awards perspective as well. But
Yeah.
worthy, a worthy movie.
Oh, absolutely. I read that this is one that Scorsese didn't even think would like be in the running to get him an
Yeah.
Oscar just because it was so like violent. And nope, he got it.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. It's a good one. Sometimes, the Academy is notorious for finally awarding actors or directors for their pieces that they've created as like a career award. Like, okay, we want to
Hmm.
acknowledge that you are prominent and significant, but they'll give it
Yeah.
to like a pretty great performance, but not their best. And while I I think that there's other films that are probably more representative as like distinct style. I think this is such a strong one to give it to him for as well. So I'm pleased. I'm
Mhm.
pleased.
Oh, it's such a good movie. It's so fun.
It's a good time. It's a good time. Okay. Uh, let's include a spoiler here. So if you haven't seen The Departed, it is available on Paramount Plus. No,
Netflix.
Netflix. Yes, it is available on Netflix. Um, we highly recommend checking it out before continuing to listen. This is a movie that definitely rewards going with a white canvas for sure, for sure. You will not enjoy this movie as much if you are aware of some of the plot events towards the end. Okay, we have full reign. Where shall we start? Where should we dive in first?
Yeah, what do you want to talk about first? Keep talking about what you loved about this movie.
Oh my gosh. I I want to start with the ending. We'll start from the end. Okay. I think that it is hard to do an ending that is as good as this one. Um, this the violent surprises that we get in the last 10 minutes of this film, I think, are what make this film incredibly strong. It's strong throughout the rest of the process parts and the character development, but it feels like it's building towards something. And I just was so pleased that we get the big explosive ending that feels fitting for a movie like this. Like we built to something that was worthy, and the backstabbing, the loyalty shifting, all of that in the ending 10 minutes, particularly basically when they go down the elevator. Everything from that point on towards the end, I thought was so fitting thematically for this movie, but also it's what Scorsese does incredibly well, which is to give us an incredibly violent moment when we kind of least expect it, and there's no cues or anything that we can be preparing for that. But his timing in those scenes is incredible. It reminds me a lot of the climactic, explosive ending of Taxi Driver, which feels visceral, partially because we're kind of caught off guard. And there's so many of those moments like that in the ending 10 minutes of this movie that I thought um, really was the cherry on top of an already very good ice cream sundae.
And it feels like cosmic justice that
Yes.
everybody dies basically.
Hmm.
Without feeling cheesy though. Like I just love the way that it's all orchestrated, and I think part of it is like you said, it's surprising and some elements of it catch you off guard. But like one of my favorite things is that you kind of forget about Mark Wahlberg's character a little bit,
Yes.
and then he like when Matt Damon's character is walking home and his door is a little bit ajar and it's like, "Oh my gosh, somebody's going to kill him off, but who is left?" And then the
Yeah.
door opens and you see that it's Mark Wahlberg's character. It's like, "Oh my gosh, I completely forgot about him." Yes. So I
Hmm.
just I love those little surprises and those little nuances in the screenplay that you get so focused on this other aspect over here that you forget about this other player over here. It feels like sleight of hand a lot of the times
Yes.
because they're just constantly shuffling your attention and like, oh, okay, look over here while this other thing is happening, so that when your mind remembers about this other character, it's so impactful and so surprising, and you're even more engrossed in the film.
Yes, yes. It's so well crafted and well planned because you're right, that timing is perfect. And the the big like dramatic scene that we get kind of in the center of the film of Queenan passing too is still like on our minds, but has there's also so much that has unfolded since, and this combustible two organizations are combusting, right? And so that feels like a thing of the past, and yet, like you mentioned, cosmic justice, it feels fitting that it's Diggin who's the one to take Sullivan out. So good. I think it's I think it's the most fitting end for him as well. Um,
Hmm.
just for him as a character, honestly. Yeah, because one of the thoughts that I had was like, this man is going to have such a tough job surviving. Either he's going to get turned in by somebody who is selling some gangster member who is just gonna sell him in order to protect himself, or he himself is going to have to go and take everyone out in order to protect himself. And either of those two options aren't really great for him. So in a way, this is a very kind ending for Sullivan as well.
Yeah, yeah, it really is, honestly. He deserved a much worse fate, I think, than
Yep.
he gets. Uh, but I love again this kind of like these parallel tracks that are happening here. Because first you get uh I forget if Francis or Queenan gets murdered first, but those two get murdered very quickly in succession with each other. And then you get Billy and Colin both murdered very quickly in succession of each other. So it's just like these like boom
Mm,
boom and then you wait a little bit and then boom boom it all happens again. And I loved that pacing and that intentionality of these
mm,
two can't operate without the other almost. And
yeah.
so if one dies, then so does the other. It's this weird balancing act that this film constantly seems to be playing with us.
Mhm. Mhm. Which again is like keeping the forces at play balanced against each other in a weird
Mhm.
way to
Yeah.
maintain some semblance of stability in some ways, right? Yeah, it's so good. So good. The other thing that I loved about the that ending sequence, especially the moments right after they come down the elevator, is that it is still character driven, and I am still on the edge of my seat wondering what choices these characters will make and what that will say about them. So the moment where um, Sullivan takes out Trooper Berrigan, who reveals himself to also be a mole and a rat inside of the police department that was working for Costello, and his immediate ability to just take him out, I think was so interesting and fascinating because for most of the film, we know that he was part of Frank's system and that community and raised in that from a young age, but we actually haven't seen Sullivan really violently take someone out yet with his bare hands, right? Like he's operating within the system, but he's kind of operating from a position of power and disguise. So we haven't seen him do the deeds. And the quickness and kind of the like lack of hesitation that he has to just take out Trooper Berrigan after he's expressed like, "Hey, we're in this together," I just thought was such a character defining moment as well. And I think it's the exciting part of this movie, which is that even till the end, we're still seeing characters make choices that really define and reveal to us who they really are.
And I think one of the things that makes Colin so fascinating to me as a character is that he's contrasted with Billy. And you see him try like Billy trying to do the law, even though like he's he's been wiped from the system, he's been committing all of these crimes, he's out on his own, but he's still like, I am a police officer, I'm going to take you down. And he's trying to do the noble thing after doing so many terrible things for the past 2 hours.
Mhm.
He is going to be on the side of justice, and he tries to do the right thing. And Colin doesn't care, man. He's like, nope,
Mhm.
I know who I am. I'm going to take these people out because it means my survival. So I love that they respond to these very dire situations in such different ways. And they
Mhm.
place their trust in different things. Because Billy is
Mhm.
trusting that the system and being a police officer and doing the quote unquote right thing will save him. And Colin
Mhm.
knows, nope, I got to look out for
How it works.
myself,
Yep.
and I have to trust myself because I can't trust anybody else. I'm all in
Mhm.
it for me. And I loved those contrasts that we see all throughout the movie, but it's even more clear there in their final moments, really.
Mhm. Mhm. And there's like a really fascinating uh detail nuance that's included in that scene where Billy chooses to call his friend from the police academy to be the person
Mhm.
that arrives.
Yeah.
And specifically, like that line that he says where he's like, "You know me. You know who I am." Like pleading with him, but also you see that it works. Like there is the hesitation, the um kind of inner turmoil that we see from that character that shows up for like zero point 0.5 seconds of this entire movie, but there the strength of that like personal dynamic and personal relationship between these two old friends from the police academy trumps his instincts and his kind of loyalty to the chain of command and the authority systems in place because theoretically what's his face? Matt Damon's character is a police sergeant. Like he is in a position of authority. Like there is a obedience that typically you would need to have, but that personal relationship and that human connection that Billy has with that other officer has trumped that. And I thought that was such a interesting moment as well, especially in a moment that's so high tension where you as a human being are making choices kind of very quickly. Like it really is revealing to where your tendencies are or what your gut reactions are because you don't have time to like analyze like what's best for me and how do I keep my job, all that kind of stuff. No, you are making gut reactions. And so that inherently is conducive to character revealing moments. And I thought that was really fascinating, that moment.
And I loved that line that he repeats over and over and over again.
So heartbreaking.
Well, because it's almost the foundation for this entire film. You know,
Hmm.
cuz Billy has to kind of like discard who he is and take on this other persona, and the entire movie is just him grappling with who am I? Can I hold on to who I actually am without succumbing to everything I'm doing in this organization that I've infiltrated and all of that. And then we also see from Colin, you know, he knows who he is, but nobody else outside of him seems to know who he is. So again, the entire movie is about who are these two men, who are they really at the core of their beings, and then we kind of see who they are
Hmm.
in those ending scenes. So I just thought that that repeating over and over again of you know who I am, you know who I am, just makes so much sense for this character who has struggled for 2 hours to retain who he is.
Mhm. Yes, yes. That's so true. And I think there's another really great detail that they've woven into this around that sense of identity and how that's defined, which is that some of it's also rooted in the way that you are useful to an organization or used by an organization or treated by an organization as also like who you're associated with because we see so much that one of the reasons Billy is recruited and is able to be primed as a mole to infiltrate Costello's system is because of who his uncle is, right? And who his father was, and the family that he comes from, and what that means for him, and how there's like a warmth and kind of an openness that you see Costello and the rest of his people have towards him because they had such a close relationship with his uncle. And I thought that was really another like interesting dimension that kind of also complicates this idea of in a in it's so like a distinctly an American trait to be like you can define and create who you are. And actually this movie introduces this other theme, which is that actually who you are and where you come from, who your family is, plays a pretty big factor in it as well.
Well, and what I loved about the setup, you know, when we're in Queenan's office and we're first learning about who Billy is and they're recruiting him, and Mark Wahlberg's character does this in the most
I love his
brash way
character so much.
possible. It's very in your face, but I love that his whole point of the reason why they're selecting Billy for this is because Billy has already lived a dual life, and he goes through such detail of demonstrating how he was one way when he was with his mom and then the other way when he was with his dad, and he even had different accents. He was different people, and he learned that probably as a defense mechanism as a child. And so now the police are going to use that defense mechanism
Yeah.
to further their goals, basically. And so I loved that that was the detail. Like, he didn't go to school for this. There wasn't a course that he took for this.
Mm.
Like, he wasn't particularly skilled in like these certain things. No, he learned how to be kind of a chameleon and switch into a different situation when he needed to. And that was what qualified him for this. I loved that detail.
Yeah, no, that's so good. I didn't even think about that aspect of it, but yeah, that whole opening scene, I think also, um, it it shows how, what's the word I'm trying to use? Expedient, maybe, that the police organization is as well, just the same way that the gangs are as well, which is that, like, what is useful to us and how can we exploit it and use it? Like, they're not concerned for the human in the situation. Like, you are a tool and we will use you how we need to. And you see that threat from Mark Wahlberg's character again and again in those secret meetings that they have, like, under the bridges and whatnot, where he threatens. He says, "We are the only ones that know about you." You know what I mean? Like, so you have to listen to us now, because if not, we wipe your name from the system, and, like, now you are tied to all of these crimes with Costello, and we have all of the evidence. Like, that blackmail is so shady, and they are taking advantage of Billy. And in the same way, like you mentioned, with this parallel between these organizations, the same way that Costello is also protecting himself and taking advantage of just using Sullivan for when he needs to. And you see the way that everyone's really looking out for their own goals and their own objectives. There is no loyalty, there is no, like, goodwill here. It's all just pure business.
Yeah, yeah, and I think to your point, we also see that kind of like disregard for Billy early on when he's first infiltrating Costello's gang. His first meeting, they pat him down for a wire, also destroy his cast and like re-break his arm. That's
Mm.
awful. But then the second time we see him meeting with Costello, he is wearing a wire, even though they had searched for a wire in the previous meeting. And so I think it's those little subtle things that show that the police are just after their man. They don't care what happens to this kid. And
Mhm.
of course, Billy advocates for himself and doesn't wear a wire again. But I loved that there were those little details in there. And you see, Queenum and Mark Wahlberg's character, like, really talking a good talk with the other police officers and like, oh, I'm not going to tell you who my informant is, da 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 da. But at the same time, you also see their disregard for his safety. So you even see this duality from them as well, which
Mhm.
I think is interesting. It really is. Everybody is out for themselves, and
Mhm.
that's fascinating to see every character in that boat in this movie.
Yep. Yep. No, I think it's so true that those two, Queenum and Dignam, are also foils even within of themselves. And
Hmm.
and the
Yeah.
way that they approach and interact with Billy, they're playing good cop bad cop to a T. Like, uh I just love Mark Wahlberg's character. Can we just take a moment? The frenetic
Yeah.
energy
Marky
is
Mark.
amazing.
Yes.
He he is a I want more scenes with him just to see him, like, go off, honestly. It's a little firecracker.
Well, and I think it's so fun about this movie is that you see characters or like actors from Boston playing these
Mhm.
characters from Boston. And so it
Yeah.
was just so fun to see Mark Wahlberg just dropping right back into his accent and just going all ham with it. It was great. And same
Yep.
thing with Matt Damon too.
Yes. Yes.
It
Yep.
was just so fun.
Mhm. Mhm. So good. This movie is so star-studded. It's a good time. One other thing that I didn't think about during the film, but as I was reading more about it, that so Brad Pitt produced the film, but it was originally supposed to play Sullivan's character,
Hmm.
and he decided not to because he felt like he was too old for that character, which then made me think about the fact that these two men in these two roles and these characters are on the younger side, I think is pretty significant. And the tone and the message and the way that this movie feels and is received, I think would be very different had you had to like men playing these two characters that were 5 to 10 years older. There's something about these two men and kind of the youthfulness of those two actors in those roles that I think contributes to one, kind of this like uh, raw aggression or ambition that they both have to finesse, and this feeling of scrappiness that you see them both able to like maneuver out of situations and whatnot. That there's kind of like a raw talent that they both have. But two, I think it's clear that that picture of them being used by the older powers that be, the systems of authority in their respective organizations, like that power dynamic is, I think, a lot more obvious and easier for us to receive as the viewer, because there's these two younger actors playing these roles versus like older men who are maybe clearly able to finesse or to make decisions or advocate for themselves or have that like raw aggression more refined.
Yeah, and I think it also highlights uh how these older characters are almost father figures to these
Mm,
younger men
that's so
who
good.
don't
Yeah.
have fathers. And you really see Costello playing that up with Colin, and then Queenan kind of steps into that role for Billy. And it's
Mm,
even that is fascinating to watch, how they both show tenderness at times, but then they also can be almost cruel at times too. And so it's just interesting to watch these quote unquote sons respond and try and obey and please their father figures as they are
mhm.
operating in these organizations.
No, that's so good. That's so good. Uh, that dynamic is so key, and we as much as I want to hate on Sullivan's character because he's absolutely awful, and I think that the foil between the way that they both relate to Madeline, the primary female character in this movie, is also
Mhm.
just like we need to unpack that as well.
Yeah, for sure.
But um, there we get that small moment, that little scene at the very beginning where we see that Sullivan was recruited from such a young age and really grew up and was trained by Costello when he was a boy. And so I think it there's a lot more empathy for that character knowing that he was sucked into this world and was trained in this world, and that's where his ambitions, his psyche, his values, they're all shaped from a young age by this messed up system. And so, I mean, he's still an asshole in a lot of ways, but there's that little scene at the beginning, I think, colors the rest of the way that we see and relate to this character that I think is a lot more interesting and a lot more complex than just him parading around and doing his thing.
Yeah, because without that, Sullivan is not a sympathetic character
Yeah.
at all.
Nope.
He's kind of the worst.
He really is.
Uh, but like you said, because we've seen him as a kid getting swept up into this, and this is the world that he knows,
Mhm.
this is his family.
Yeah.
This is where he has found love and affirmation and protection and safety and all of these things. Then that makes sense how he's become this way, and he becomes a little bit more of a tragic character, even though I do believe he has agency and he's making these decisions and that does not absolve him, yada, yada. But it does make him more interesting than if he was just like a straight up bad dude and we didn't have that context.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think it also explains why he's able to think so quickly and kind of
Hmm.
ruthlessly in the
Yeah.
decisions that he makes. You know, like his gut reaction is to just wipe out Billy's file in the system, and like that comes to him
Yeah.
so quickly. You know, like his ability to take out Trooper Berrigan at the end there too. Like he has been his mind has been trained to operate out of protection and safety and stability, and there's a ruthlessness about that that I think makes sense if we see him as someone who's grown up in the system. The contrast is that Billy is like racked with guilt and
Yeah.
like in turmoil, right? Because this world that he's inhabiting is so jarring and violent and terrifying for him. I too would be terrified.
Well, and again, this contrast between these two characters is so good because they're both living a double life. But Billy is destroying himself. Like he
Yeah.
cannot hold it together because yeah, obviously like he is fearful that he is going to be found out whether I mean it could happen 100 different ways. He might be murdered, he might do something wrong and he is on the hook for all of these crimes. A million things can go wrong and he's losing it. At the same time, Colin is also in a perilous position. People are searching for him, but he is cool as a cucumber.
Yes.
He is unbothered by any of this. And I think
Whatever he's
that
on, man.
that makes both so much more interesting to
Yeah.
me though because we're constantly flipping back and forth between these two. And so you see Billy who is a train wreck and is just weeping and just drugging himself so that he can get through the day, and then
Yeah.
Colin is like just chilling. And
Yeah.
it's so fascinating. I don't know that either, like, both characters are interesting on their own, but when you pair them together, they become infinitely more interesting to watch and examine and unpack.
Yeah, yeah, and they highlight what is so distinct about who they are and how they're reacting, right? It really because you see what the other side is doing and feeling, it emphasizes like, "Oh, yeah, there is such a difference between the way that these 2 men are wired." And you can see that contrast more clearly because you're going back and forth versus I think if we just gotten one or the other, it's just it packs a lesser punch. Like you can see the saturation of the colors between the two of them because they are literally held next to each other for us.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love that they always choose the opposite of each other. Like you see how one
Mm,
reacts, and so you're like, "Okay, I have a baseline for how one would react in this situation." And then you go to the other and they do the exact opposite thing. It's like, "Oh,
mhm.
okay, cool. That
Yep.
that was interesting." So it's just this
Yep.
constant back and forth of surprising decisions even though it makes sense for the character. You've already seen a different response. So you're not quite expecting where the other character will go. It's so cool the way this film kind of plays with you
Yep.
as you're moving through these different characters.
Yes. Yes. Constantly playing with our expectations and subverting them, which is why it's a thrilling experience. Yeah.
Mhm. Yep. Thrilling is right.
But
It's great.
on the similar vein, or maybe the flip side of that, is that they because they're also held up next to each other, we can see how they are similar in a lot of ways as well.
Yes.
Like I think the ability that they both have to read the other person that they're trying to outmaneuver or finesse their way out of a sticky situation, and the emotional intelligence they have to know and understand how human beings are wired and to play on that, I think is incredibly fascinating. I think it's obviously very clear the way that Sullivan is able to do that. He's constantly doing that in his job, but Billy especially, the way he works Costello, and that scene that sticks out to me is the one where he's like, think about the person that's going to come after you is the one that is most believing that they can take over your operation and run it themselves, and because he's trying to divert the attention away from himself, and he is able to play on that fear, that anxiety, that paranoia that he knows that any mob boss would probably have, and twist that and fuel that. And so they're both of these men are highly emotionally intelligent, and I mean, it's thrilling to see them just finesse their way throughout this entire movie, but they do have that in common, which is what makes them so skillful at their jobs, but also very similar in a lot of ways as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating to watch that. And you see how that plays out so differently too cuz the way that Billy reads people is very different than the way that Colin reads people, even though they're doing the same thing. And
Mm,
I appreciate that Colin, his like reading of people is understanding hierarchy and how to move up in a hierarchy. And so
yeah.
it's less of
So good.
like Billy will do, and he's just very clearly reading your emotions and can just peer into your soul and just make assumptions, and
Mm,
he's right. And Colin, I feel like, is a little bit more crafty with it, and he understands people in positions of power want X thing, so I'm going to deliver X thing so that then I can advance.
mhm,
It's cool how the same trait that they share is displayed in very different ways.
mhm, and makes them fitting for the roles that they're playing, right?
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
it's genius that Colin is the one that's put into this, like, very hierarchical system and knows how to finesse his way up. Like, props on Costello for recognizing that trait in one of your dudes and activating them in that area, right?
Yeah.
Like, talk about aligning like a person's strengths to the things that they're working on. Good job, Costello. You
Honestly,
know,
that's
like
just a good
some great
leader, a
leadership
good
happening
manager.
here. Yes, some great leadership management style work happening in Costello. What a star student. Um,
What a star.
what a star. But
In the
but
Irish
you're
gang.
right, but also Sullivan also knows what he can wield with the authority that he has and how far he can go. There's several moments where he's questioned about a decision that he makes, and he knows how to say, "Well, like, hey, I am the person in charge here. Like, don't question me. Let's go." And everyone in the room is like, "Okay, well, yes, he does. He is the sergeant. Okay, well, let," and they immediately obey. So he knows how far he can use his authority and his power and in what situations. And I think that is also takes a lot of emotional intelligence and understanding of the systems because he doesn't step
Mhm,
to the
mhm.
point where he draws suspicion on himself. It's always within, perfectly within the bounds that he recognizes. And I think that takes a lot as well.
Well, and especially given how ambitious he is, that he
Hmm.
is able to stay within his boundaries so that his own ambitions don't work against him.
Yep. Okay. Do we want to talk about some of the female characters? I think this is something that you mentioned earlier in the film, earlier in the episode.
Yeah, man. Let's talk about Madeline, who's very bad at her job.
Yes.
Like, she
She's the
does
worst.
everything
She
wrong.
yes.
She does not make one right decision in the entire 2 hours and 30 minutes of this film.
No,
Poor girl.
it's it's rough. It's real rough.
It's very rough.
I thought that because these two men are connected to her, that she was somehow going to consciously or likely unconsciously share a detail that tips off the other to recognize that, oh, this is who the mole is. Like I thought she was going to play a key role in the unveiling and the discovery of them two realizing each other is the mole in their respective organizations.
Yep. Nope.
Nope. Which I think is great. I'm actually pleased that they didn't do that because I think it's a subversion of my expectations as well. They come to that through other means, and it like I mentioned earlier, this is a process movie, so that was really fun, and I'm glad it wasn't. This person happens to be in the middle of these two things, and therefore slips a detail that tips off the other side. I think that would have been the less interesting way to do this.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And I also appreciate that doesn't she's not really stuck between the two. Like, she's dating
Mm,
Colin, she has a moment with Billy, and that's kind of it. Like, she doesn't choose Billy, she chooses Colin. And so I appreciated that they weren't both dating the same girl at the same time while being on the opposite
oh,
sides.
yeah.
So they they like step a toe into that trope, and then they get out of it. And
Little
I
pinky toe.
yeah, I appreciated that they didn't cannonball into that trope.
One thing that you mentioned though was interestingly the um way that these men view their relationship to women and how that defines them, or how they see the role that the women play in their lives. Like I think it's fascinating the foil between the way that Sullivan treats Madeline like she's something that he can control. It's
Mhm.
used to
Yeah.
fuel his ego, his sense of power, his sense of dominance, and Billy uses Madeline as well for comfort and for affection, and that is a fascinating commentary on the role of women in general. So I'm curious your thoughts on that front because I think,
Yeah. Yeah, I really appreciated those conversations that happened in the middle cuz you see conversations between Colin and Ellerby when he's at like the driving range or whatever, and Ellerby is asking like, "Oh, how's the
mm,
wedding coming along?"
mhm,
And Sullivan's like, "Oh yeah, it's great. She's a doctor," like all of this, and Ellerby makes a comment to the effect of uh good, like you need to be married to move up in the department. And then shortly after, there's a conversation between Costello and Billy, and Costello asks, "Do you have a relationship? Or are you in a relationship? Do you have a girlfriend?" And then later in that same conversation, Frank says that he doesn't trust Billy, and those two things are correlated. So I loved those two conversations happening so close to each other so that we can get into the mindset of these men, and it reframes how both Colin and Billy are responding to Madeline, who is the object of their affections, that it's not really about her, it's not really about a relationship necessarily, but it really is a transaction. And
yeah,
like you said, for Colin, it is advancement, it is status, it is all of these things, and for Billy it is more of comfort and having somebody that he can trust and confide in as his world is going falling apart.
yeah,
But it's all about these men and what they can get from her, and not
yeah.
an actual relationship.
Yes, yes. No, I think that's a really great point, which is that I think it's easy to maybe assume that Billy is more well intentioned. Like it's not
Yeah.
so obvious that he is also using Madeline, but
Hmm.
I would argue as well that he is using her to serve himself in the same way that Sullivan is. I think Sullivan is just like more obviously just him parading around with his ego. And we've seen that a million times, so it's immediately jarring to us. And there feels like there's something a little bit softer about Billy's relationship with Madeline. But I do agree with you that it's ultimately self-serving, and he's not really interested. There's never a moment that we see that he's really interested in knowing who she is, what she's about. It's all him coming to her with his um his brokenness, and hoping that she can heal him in some way. And so it is ultimately selfish, but I think it's maybe not on the surface as rough and hard to watch that it is with Sullivan and Madeline's relationship.
Hmm. Yeah, because he's so vulnerable.
Hmm.
So it's like, oh wow, okay, maybe this is a little bit better, but
Yeah, when you really think about it, you're
just
like,
as
yeah,
dysfunctional.
yes. You don't really care about her. You've never asked her much about herself, really.
Right.
Come on. Yeah.
Yeah. I have so many questions about Madeline because
Oh man.
she is a psychiatrist. She's so bad at her job, and she doesn't respond to any of the red flags that she's seeing anywhere. And so I want to know everything about her. Like, please tell me why you are the way that you are.
Yeah, yeah.
It's just so
She's
fascinating
got
to
her
watch her
own
make all the wrong
own
choices.
issues. Yeah, it's real bad.
Yeah.
It's interesting though that because she does have agency, she just uses it so poorly. You know,
Mhm. Yep.
she makes
Yeah.
decisions for herself,
She sure does.
and that affects the plot, which is
Yep.
great, awesome. We love to see that.
Yep.
She chooses to walk away from Sullivan when she discovers that he is working for the gang, right? Like she makes seemingly sometimes good choices for herself with her own confidence and her own free will, but she's gotten herself so deep in a pickle to begin with from some of the bad choices that's hard to. We're like 50 steps in and like 2 steps backing out of these poor
Yeah.
decisions that we've made.
Yeah. It's a
We
bit
have
late.
cannonballed in, and now we're trying to like take our little pinky toe and start to get out.
Yeah, it's just not gonna work.
Yeah.
You're in too deep.
Yep. Any other things that we wanted to talk about with The Departed? Time is flying, man.
Right? Oh my gosh. Okay. I want to talk about two things. A silly thing and then a serious thing. So the serious thing is, can we just talk about how efficient this script is?
Oh,
Uh,
so good. The dialogue.
oh
Oh
my
my
gosh,
goodness, the dialogue.
so good. So
Impeccable.
like in the first 2 minutes of this film, you already know that Jack Nicholson's character is the literal worst, and you haven't even seen his face. Like
Yeah.
just from
Yeah.
the things that I mean, also it's Jack Nicholson, so you already are like 50% sure that he's going to be a villain. But the dialogue backs it up. And just the way that he speaks about people, and he's using racial slurs and all of
Mm.
these things, and it's like, "Oh my gosh, you are the bad guy." But also as the film is being set up and we're going back and forth between Colin and Billy and these worlds as they are progressing through their training. I love how clear this film sets up the culture that they are inhabiting. You
Mm.
know very early on, you know, the racism that is apparent in these worlds that they're inhabiting. You know the strong Irish Catholic
Mhm.
ness of everything that you're getting into. I love how quickly we get there. There's no question about this world that these characters are operating in. And so you're not surprised for the rest of the movie when it continues to operate from that mindset. And I don't know, I appreciated how quickly we got there. It was great.
Yes, both in Costello's gang and also in the world and the system of the police department as well. Yeah,
Yes.
like male parading that happens and the insults that fly back and forth, the banter that they have, like it is all part of the way that they relate to each other in that system as well. Very true, very true. These two worlds are it really is world building, and
Hmm.
you're right, they are built so efficiently.
Yeah. Yeah, as a
So good.
person who is not from Boston, this was very helpful in me understanding the world that we are in because I don't live in that world.
Mhm, mhm. I did have a thought, during this movie when we're, like, halfway through, and I'm like, "I don't want this to end," which is, this could be like a 6 to 8 episode TV series, and I would be thrilled. It's
Yeah.
the same way that I'm glad Succession ended when it did, but really that show could continue on forward because the characters are so dynamic and the dialogue is so great, and like you just set up these moments where they have to figure out what to do. I could see them doing something similar with this premise and essentially dragging out the process part of this cat and mouse game. And I think because the dialogue and the characters and the world that they inhabit is so interesting, that I wouldn't mind spending more time, longer than 2 hours and a half in this little world.
Mm. No, that's super fun. I love that idea.
Right? I think it would be probably less punchy. Like this is very strong. This makes a lot of sense. The pacing's great, all that kind of stuff. But there is a version of this that I think you could drag it out. Set up
Hmm.
another sting operation. It goes wrong because someone
Yeah.
maneuvered some way. Like you could do a couple more of these. I would not be opposed.
Okay, so we need more cat and mouse Boston shows for you.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes. I mean, there are so many episodes of Tom and Jerry. So if Tom and Jerry can do it,
This is true. Yeah, if
so
Tom and
so
Jerry
can The
can do it.
Departed.
Okay, Scorsese, we need more from you.
Mhm. Mhm. Let's do a study of the Tom and Jerry structure, okay? And see how we
Perfect.
replicate in the world of the Boston gangs.
Excellent. Yes. Yeah,
I'm here
much
for
to
it.
be learned from Tom and Jerry.
What was your silly thing?
We got to talk pinky rings.
I had a feeling there would be pinky rings. I did not notice any of them because I don't know, distracted by everything else. But who? I'm assuming it's someone in Costello's gang or
Yes, I
Costello
only
himself.
spotted one. I will give you one guess as to who wore the pinky ring.
I am going to guess what's his face? French.
Wow, no.
Oh,
It was Costello. Francis was the one who was wearing it.
really?
Yeah, on his left hand.
Hmm.
Yep.
There was a moment where I saw a flash of something shiny on Costello, but it was on his ring finger in that scene. So I was like, oh man, I was gonna come to this episode with the pinky ring spotting. But apparently there's another scene where he had one on his pinky.
No, I think it was the whole movie. He was wearing a pinky ring.
Oh,
Yeah.
interesting. This tracks.
Mhm.
This is a good data point as well.
Right? It was fitting
Very
that the
good.
big boss bad guy was the one who
Oh
was wearing a
yeah.
pinky ring.
Oh yes. I wanted to mention that Jack Nicholson plays Frank so
Oh,
well. It is like
so
so
good.
juicy how devilish he is. It's great. He's the perfect casting for it. But I also wanted to mention that I think Mark Wahlberg does an incredible job playing Dignam, and that like
Yes.
big energy and the frenetic and chaotic and just explosiveness of it.
Yeah.
I think that really stood out to me too as some great performances.
Oh,
Alec Baldwin's in this.
he is.
What?
This is one of those movies where I was just constantly like, oh my gosh, and you're in this. Oh my gosh, and you're in this.
Yeah.
Like, just
Yeah.
constantly.
So good. I also was like, this was made in 2006, and I don't understand how Alec Baldwin does not look like he's aged at all since 2006.
Mm-hmm.
It's insane. The man looks the same, frozen in
Yeah.
time.
It's wild.
So good. All right. Any other last thoughts for The Departed before we wrap up?
I would just like to give a shout out to the Dropkick Murphys because some of their songs were in this movie, and that's just so fitting for this whole Boston Irish vibe. It was
Yeah.
great. It was great
Yeah.
to see them showing up.
The score for this is pretty great.
Oh, it's so good.
Fitting. So Scorsese to do as
Mhm.
well. And some of those like scenes of tension and violence to pair it with something like that. So good.
Mm-hmm. Great time.
Mm-hmm. All right. This was great. I loved it. This was our review and discussion of The Departed. You can find it available on Netflix. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Movies and Us. Our name sums it up. We're all about movies and the powerful ways we can connect with each other and the world around us. This podcast is about all of us and our shared stories. Everyone is welcome here, and we're so glad that you hung out with us today. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you tune into your favorite shows. Drop us a rating and review, letting us know you enjoyed today's episode. You can connect with us on Instagram and Twitter at moviesandUsPod, or email us at moviesandUsPod@gmail.com. We actually have some exciting news as well of something that's dropping tomorrow. What's happening tomorrow, Sarah?
Well, Jen, we have a second podcast called
We
TV
do.
Us. And each season we go episode by episode through a season of TV.
Mm-hmm.
And this season, it worked out perfectly that we are reviewing The Departed. We are reviewing True Detective Season 1, and our first episode drops tomorrow. So if you want more conversations, if you are a True Detective fan, head on over to TVNS tomorrow and actually head on over there now and just follow the show, and then it'll show up in your feed tomorrow. And join us for all, how many episodes are there? 8 episodes of True Detective.
More corrupt cops. If you can't get enough of corrupt cops, conversations with us, hanging out with us.
Yeah. Interesting character studies. You know.
There's actually a lot in common between The Departed and the True Detective.
This worked out very well. Like, we didn't intentionally plan this, but this worked out great.
And for this season of TV and Us, we are joined by two very special guests that are joining for our conversations about True Detective, which is a really great time. So check us out over there. Okay, we will be back next week here on Movies and Us to discuss the film The Creator. We hope you have an amazing week, and we'll see you back here next week.